I was at a dinner party in Stockholm recently, the kind where everyone is an architect or a tech lead, and the conversation flows effortlessly around deconstructing traditional power structures. My host, Henrik, spent the first course explaining how he and his partner had entirely neutralized their relationship. No roles, no expectations, just two sovereign individuals in a perfectly symmetrical partnership. He spoke with a serene, almost academic confidence about having moved beyond biology. But then the power went out. Not a flicker, but a heavy, total darkness that swallowed the room. In that split second of silence, I watched Henrik. He didn't reach for a flashlight or check the breaker. Instead, he instinctively stepped in front of his partner, his frame tensing, his eyes scanning the shadows with a sudden sharp alertness that had nothing to do with modern sociology. His partner didn't look for the exit. She moved into his shadow, her hand instinctively finding the fabric of his shirt. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. When the lights buzzed back to life, they both looked slightly startled, then embarrassed. They immediately retreated into a conversation about their shared housework spreadsheet. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was like watching a sleek, modern interface crash for just a moment, revealing the ancient, unyielding command line code running the entire system underneath. We live in an era that insists we are blank slates, that gender is a narrative we can simply edit or delete. But as we look at the academic thunderclap of 2026, a haunting question emerges. What happens when the social software we've spent 50 years writing finally hits the hard limit of 1 billion years of evolutionary hardware? Why is it that in the most equal societies on Earth, the primal differences we try to erase are actually screaming the loudest? And, that story, it just really stays with me. It's that moment of friction that makes everyone so uncomfortable.
It creates a real cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? It's very hard for us to resolve.
Yeah. We spend all our time living in what you might call the software, the culture, our ideals, those spreadsheets. But the hardware underneath, it hasn't had an update in, 50,000 years?
And that's the perfect analogy, what you saw in that room in Stockholm. That's the textbook example of what evolutionary psychologists call evolutionary mismatch. We have, constructed this social and physical world that is it's radically different from the one our brains and bodies evolved in.
So we're running Paleolithic firmware on a silicon chip.
Exactly. The firmware, our instincts, our gut reactions, our mating strategies, it was all coded for the savannah, for small, tight-knit tribes, for scarcity, for immediate physical danger.
Right.
And now we're trying to run that same ancient code in a world of digital abundance, total physical safety, and global connectivity. The system is it's throwing error messages all over the place.
And that's really what we're going to be digging into today. We've got a huge stack of research to get through. It's everything from, Scandinavian sociology all the way to the deep neuroscience of dominance.
Yeah.
But I want to be really clear about what the mission is here. We are not here to moralize. We're not going to sit here and say Henrik was right or wrong for what he did.
No, absolutely not. Morality is a social layer. It's part of the software. We want to look at the functional layer. The mechanics of the biology.
The command line code.
Exactly, because if we can understand the code, we start being so surprised when the interface crashes.
Okay, so let's start with that academic thunderclap I mentioned, because it ties directly back to where I was, Stockholm. I was reading this case study, and it was about a woman named Ellen. Now, Ellen, she is basically the poster child for the modern progressive ideal.
Yeah.
She's in Sweden, so you're talking about arguably one of the most egalitarian societies in all of human history.
Every institutional barrier has been removed, in theory.
That's the idea. And her parents were these progressive academics. They pushed her hard towards STEM, and she was brilliant at it. Got the scholarships, went to a top robotics program. On paper, she's the perfect success story of social engineering.
She's the proof that the model works.
Right. But then, a year into her doctorate, she hits a wall. She's in this cold, sterile lab building these incredible complex machines, and she feels completely empty. She describes it as this physical resistance from her own body. And eventually she drops out. She pivots to nursing, specifically pediatric oncology.
Wow. That's a huge shift.
It's a massive shift. And to the sociologists, the ones at the dinner party, this looks like a failure. It looks like a regression into a gender stereotype. But Ellen said something in an interview that it floored me. She said that once she stopped trying to prove she could be a man, she was finally free to listen to her own biological compass.
And Ellen is not an anomaly. Not at all. She is, in fact, a single data point in one of the most robust and, frankly, one of the most confusing findings in all of modern social science. Okay, this is what the researchers Stowett and Geary identified as the gender equality paradox.
Let's stop there and really drill into this, because I agree, on the surface, it makes zero sense. The whole progressive narrative is that gender differences are mostly social constructs, right?
That's the blank slate idea, yes.
So if you remove the patriarchy, you remove the social pressure, men and women will, basically behave the same. You'd expect 50-50 female engineers in Sweden. But the data says the opposite.
The data says the exact opposite, and the correlation is incredibly strong. Stowett and Geary, they looked at data from, get this, 472,242 adolescents.
Wow.
Across 67 countries. I mean, that's a massive sample size. And what they found was that as a country becomes more gender equal, as it scores higher on things like the Global Gender Gap Index, the gap in STEM graduation actually widens.
So you're telling me that in Sweden, Finland, Norway, these places we hold up as feminist utopias, fewer women are becoming engineers than in, say, Algeria or Albania?
Correct. In countries that are traditionally viewed as less progressive or, less equal, women are far more likely to pursue careers in STEM.
Why? I mean, what is going on there?
Yeah.
Are we just saying women naturally hate math? Because that sounds like the exact stereotype we've been trying to fight for 50 years.
No, and that's where the nuance is so critical. The data does not show that women in Sweden are bad at math. Not at all. In fact, in a lot of these cohorts, the girls are performing just as well as the boys, sometimes even better, in mathematics.
So it's not a capability issue.
It's not a capability issue, it's a choice issue.
Yeah.
And it seems to be driven by two specific mechanisms. The first one is called comparative advantage.
Okay, walk me through that.
So comparative advantage is about your relative internal strength. Humans, just like economies, tend to specialize in what gives them the greatest edge. The data shows that while the girls in these developed nations are often A students in math, they are frequently A+ students in reading and verbal comprehension.
Ah, so relative to themselves, they're even better at the verbal stuff.
Exactly. They have a much broader portfolio of high-level skills. So if you're really good at math, but you are just brilliant at writing and empathy, you might lean towards law or the humanities, psychology, medicine.
You have more options.
You have more options. For a significant portion of the boys in the data set, the skew was different. They were good at math, but they were, let's say, mediocre or even poor at reading.
So for a lot of those boys, STEM is the only high-status lane open to them.
It's the path of least resistance to a good outcome. For the girls, they have options. And when you have options, you tend to make choices based on intrinsic interest.
Okay, but that still doesn't explain the Albania versus Sweden split. Why would women in Albania choose engineering if they might also have this verbal advantage?
And that brings us to the second mechanism, expectancy value theory, but with a layer of economic necessity on top. This is the part of the research that really upsets the blank slate narrative.
Okay.
In a wealthy welfare state like Sweden, the economic risk of any given career choice is effectively zero.
Right. If you fail, you don't starve. The safety net catches you.
Precisely. The safety net is so strong that you have the luxury of prioritizing your intrinsic interest, what you love to do, over what just pays the most. And the research suggests that when you strip away that economic survival pressure, men and women, on average, tend to drift toward different intrinsic interests.
Okay.
Women, on average, tilt toward organic, people-oriented fields. Think nursing, medicine, law. And men, on average, tilt toward inorganic, object-oriented fields like engineering or mechanics.
So in Albania.
In a developing economy with a weak social safety net, you don't have the luxury of following your bliss.
You follow the money.
You follow the money. A STEM career is a survival shield. An Algerian woman isn't becoming an engineer because her biological compass is pointing to robotics. She's doing it because it's the surest path to economic security for herself and for her family.
That is just, it's so ironic, isn't it? Paradoxically, maximizing freedom, removing all that economic pressure, it allows those innate biological preferences to express themselves more strongly, not less.
That is the absolute core of the paradox.
Yeah.
When you level the playing field socially and economically, you don't end up with identical outcomes. You end up with the biological bedrock.
So Ella wasn't being oppressed when she chose nursing. In a way, she was finally rich enough and safe enough to be biologically honest with herself.
That's a great way to put it.
It just reframes the whole idea of progress. I mean, we thought progress meant we would all become the same, but maybe progress just means we can finally afford to be different.
And that differentiation doesn't just happen in the workplace. I mean, if we really want to see where the hardware clashes with the software, we have to look at the mating market.
Oh, boy.
Because if the workplace is where we earn resources, the mating market is where we pass on the code itself.
This is where the friction gets really, really hot. I was reading a thread recently about digital dating burnout. And it immediately brought to mind this case study of a woman in New York. Let's call her Maya. And Maya is, by all accounts, a catch. She's smart, successful, attractive, and she is absolutely miserable. She spends like 2 hours a day on dating apps, just swiping through what is essentially a global catalog of men.
The modern condition, yeah.
Right. But here's the thing. She feels paralyzed.
Yeah.
She describes this intense, gnawing anxiety that she's settling for someone. Her Paleolithic brain, the part that evolved to vet a small tribe of maybe 50 people, is being force-fed a database of millions.
It's an overload.
A total overload. She feels like the perfect guy is just one more swipe away. So she ends up rejecting perfectly good matches over and over and over. And then she's alone, scrolling at 2 a.m, feeling like the entire system is broken.
Well, the system is broken, but probably not in the way that she thinks. Maya is suffering from a massive, massive glitch in something called Parental Investment Theory.
Okay, let's break that down. I know the term sounds a bit clinical, but it's actually pretty visceral when you get into it.
Oh, it's the foundational equation of all of sexual selection. In mammals, and especially in humans, reproduction is an inherently asymmetrical trade. We have to look at the obligatory investment.
The minimum buy-in. What's the absolute lowest cost to play the game?
Exactly. For a female ancestor, and therefore for Maya, biologically, the obligatory investment for a single reproductive choice is massive. You're talking 9 months of gestation, the metabolic tax of lactation, which is incredibly high.
Not to mention the physical vulnerability of pregnancy.
Right. And then historically, years and years of raising a completely dependent infant, so the cost of making a mistake is huge.
It's catastrophic. I mean, if a female in the Paleolithic era mated with a male who had poor genes or who just abandoned her or couldn't provide resources, that was likely the end of her lineage.
It's game over, and therefore female psychology evolved to be the gatekeeper. She has to run this rigorous vetting algorithm. Is he stable? Is he competent? Will he stick around? Rejection is her primary survival tool.
Okay, and for the male?
The obligatory biological investment can be, theoretically, 5 minutes and a teaspoon of glucose.
That is a stark difference.
It's a vast difference. The cost of a false positive for a male mating with the wrong female is negligible. So his evolved strategy is access maximization. He isn't looking for reasons to say no. He's looking for every possible opportunity to say yes.
Okay, so you have these two ancient strategies. You've got the female quality control and the male quantity access. And that equilibrium worked fine when we lived in tribes of like 150 people.
Right. In a tribe, Maya would have had maybe, 5 eligible men to choose from, and she could vet them over years. She could see who was actually a good hunter, who was kind to children, who was respected. The information was high fidelity.
But now we hand her Tinder.
We hand her a supernormal stimulus. We take that ancient quality control mechanism and we overload it. When Maya sees 1,000 profiles, her brain doesn't register digital database. It registers infinite tribe.
And that kicks her selectivity into overdrive.
It triggers a state of hyperselectivity. We could even call it virtual ovulation. In a world where supply seems infinite, the perceived cost of rejecting any one mate drops to 0. Why settle for a guy who's a 7 out of 10 in stability when the interface promises there's a 9 out of 10 just a swipe away?
So it pushes her hypergamy, that drive to partner up or across into overdrive.
Exactly.
It's like scrolling through Netflix for an hour looking for the perfect movie and then never actually watching one because you think something better might be on the next page.
That's a perfect analogy. But in mating, the consequences are emotional devastation. She's burned out because her rejection engine is running at 10,000 RPM constantly.
Now let's flip the coin. Maya is drowning in what she perceives as infinite choice. But what about the guys? I've heard this described as the David archetype, the guy who's he's invisible.
David is facing the mathematical inverse of Maya's problem. Because Maya and women like her are exercising such extreme selectivity, the average man effectively ceases to exist in the digital marketplace. We see data from these apps showing gender skews as high as 9-to-1 in some active user bases.
9 men for every 1 woman. That's not a market, that's a siege.
It's a winner-take-all economy. The top, say, 10 or 20% of men, the ones who display the most obvious signals of status and good looks, they capture the vast majority of female attention.
And that leaves the bottom 80% of men, the Davids, fighting for scraps.
Precisely. And this, of course, drastically changes their behavior. It forces them into a strategy of hyper-competition. David stops vetting. He has to. He just starts swiping right on everyone. He's casting the widest possible net just to get a single dopamine hit from a match.
Which, ironically, just makes everything worse for him.
It ruins him. This is where the collaborative filtering algorithms come into play.
Right, the tech side. How does the code itself actually punish him for doing that?
Well, think about how Amazon recommends a product. It says, people who bought this toaster also bought these spoons.
Yeah.
Dating apps do the same thing. People who liked this profile also like that profile. But they're also scoring you. If you swipe right on everyone, the algorithm flags you as low value or even spam. It assumes you have no standards, which, in a biological sense, signals low status.
And so the app just buries his profile.
It suppresses it. He becomes digitally invisible. Maya will never even see his profile.
Yeah.
So you get this tragic loop. Maya is overwhelmed by low-quality attention from the top guys and becomes more defensive, while David is starved of any attention at all and becomes more desperate. It's a perfect machine for creating misery.
It just sounds like a complete communication breakdown.
Yeah.
So how do you actually signal value in a system that's this noisy? You mentioned costly signaling in the notes.
Costly signaling is the only way to cut through cheap talk. In biology, you think of a peacock's tail. It's a costly signal. It's heavy, it makes the bird slow, it attracts predators. The very fact that the peacock is still alive, despite this handicap, proves he must be strong and healthy. It's an honest signal because it's so hard to fake.
And in the digital world, talk is cheap. A swipe is free.
A swipe costs nothing. A text costs nothing. So users have to find ways to introduce costs to prove their intent is serious. For men, ironically, this often means paying actual money.
Like buying the premium features on the app.
Or paying for professional photography.
Yeah.
Or using a super like. It's a way of signaling I have resources and I'm willing to burn them just to get your attention. It separates the serious contender from the guy who's just swiping on the toilet.
It's so cynical, but it makes perfect biological sense. You're trying to prove you aren't just a fast life history strategist?
Exactly. Life history theory is the spectrum of how we live. A fast life history is live fast, die young, reproduce now. It's quantity over quality. A slow life history is about long-term planning, high investment, quality over quantity.
And Maya wants a slow life history partner.
She's desperate for one, but the app is designed like a slot machine, which is a fast life history interface. She's looking for a husband in a casino.
That's perfectly put. I want to pivot now to the third story, because we've talked about the women burning out and the men becoming invisible. But there's a solution, or at least a response that's emerging for men. And it has nothing to do with dating apps. It's all about neurobiology.
This is the story of Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus. He's a middle manager in London. He's the guy who did everything right, but he feels like a ghost. He's in these endless Zoom meetings, flat hierarchies, no real sense of authority. He described it as feeling biologically numb, a low-resolution existence.
A total lack of agency.
Exactly. So Marcus decides he's going to hack his own hardware. He doesn't go to therapy. He goes to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym, and he starts woodworking. I mean, serious, high-stakes, difficult physical tasks. And he talks about this profound shift in his brain. He calls it the winner effect.
And he didn't coin that term. Biologists did. What happened to Marcus isn't just a psychological mood boost. It's a specific neurobiological sequence that we've actually mapped in the lab.
So what exactly is happening inside Marcus's head when he, submits someone on the mat?
It's fascinating, really. When a male wins a contest, and this holds true from mice all the way to stockbrokers, there is a surge in testosterone. But the research from the Trainer Lab and Watanabe's groups, it shows a critical detail. The surge isn't instant. It's a testosterone pulse that hits about 45 minutes after the victory.
45 minutes. That is such a specific delay. Why?
Because it's not for the fight he just finished. It's preparing him for the next one. That pulse of testosterone travels up to the brain and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And it specifically targets two areas, the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, or VTA.
The dopamine centers, the reward pathways.
Right. But here's the incredible mechanism. That testosterone pulse upregulates. It physically increases the number of androgen receptors in those reward centers.
Hold on, so it's not just dumping more dopamine into the system, it's building more receivers for the dopamine to plug into.
That's exactly it. It is remodeling the hardware of the brain to make the feeling of dominance and social aggression more rewarding. It increases the reward value of engaging in conflict. The brain effectively learns, that worked, that felt good, we're good at this, let's do it again.
It's a positive feedback loop. Winning literally makes you want to win more.
And, crucially, it makes you more likely to win. The winner effect describes the statistical probability that an animal who won a previous fight will win the next one, even if it's against a stronger opponent. The brain chemistry shifts to process social threats differently. You become less anxious and more assertive.
But this all requires a win. Marcus was stuck in a corporate job where winning is so vague. You send an email, maybe you get a reply. There's no clear victory condition.
And that's exactly why he felt like a ghost. This system is highly dependent on the striatum and the amygdala. The striatum is what codes for the value of status, and the research shows it cares deeply about social context. The striatum lights up far more when you defeat a human opponent than when you beat a computer. It craves that social hierarchy.
So playing a video game just doesn't trigger it in the same way.
Not nearly to the same extent, no. It needs to be a real social contest. And the amygdala, which handles our threat perception, it needs to be calibrated by these wins. If you just exist in a flat hierarchy with no real feedback, you are essentially starving these regions of the brain. You're blocking that receptor upregulation.
The story mentioned that Marcus did all this in a specific domain, the gym or the woodshop. Is that relevant?
It's critical. It's what's known as the residency effect. In animal models, the winner effect is strongest when the victory happens in a familiar home territory.
Field advantage.
Literally. The brain combines the memory of the location with the chemical reward of the win. Marcus couldn't just go start a fight on the subway, that's just chaos. He needed to create a domain where he could establish competency. By mastering the woodshop, he created a territory. Winning there is what triggered that profound neurobiological rewiring.
And it makes sense why he started feeling more authority at work, even though woodworking has absolutely nothing to do with being a middle manager. He carried the chemical upgrade with him.
He carried the hardware upgrade. He wasn't faking confidence. His brain was physically different. This is why the modern gig economy or the digital nomad lifestyle can be so neurologically draining for men. If you have no territory, no residency, and no clear feedback loops for victory, you are, in a sense, biologically homeless. You can't trigger the winner effect.
And this connects all three of our stories, doesn't it? We've got Ilan, Maya, and Marcus. They're all dealing with the exact same fundamental collision.
They are all hitting the hard limit of the evolutionary hardware.
Let's try to synthesize this. We have Ilan, who returns to a care role, a traditionally female strategy, despite society telling her to be an engineer. We have Maya burning out because her female vetting strategy is being exploited and overwhelmed by an algorithm. And then we have Marcus, who realizes that his male need for status and territory isn't something.
The common thread here is the failure of the social construction narrative. We've spent decades telling ourselves that these deep-seated drives are just stories we tell, that we can edit them out of the script. But the academic thunderclap is the realization that you cannot narrate your way out of your own biology.
So the answer is to stop judging these things.
Yeah.
You mentioned looking at it all through an amoral lens.
We have to. If we view these behaviors through a moral lens, we get stuck. We call Maya greedy or picky. We call Marcus toxic or aggressive. But through an evolutionary lens, they are just organisms trying to execute a survival strategy.
Right.
Maya's hypergamy isn't greed, it's risk management. It's a functional adaptation to the incredibly high cost of reproduction. Marcus's drive for hierarchy isn't about oppression. It's a neurochemical necessity for regulating his serotonin and testosterone.
So if we judge the hardware, we're basically judging our own survival code.
Exactly. And to be honest, in the dating market, what we often call values or morality is really just costly signaling. A man who shows up on time, who provides stability, who is kind, he isn't just being a good person. He is signaling slow life history. He is signaling that he has enough excess resources and internal stability to afford to be kind. It's amoral. It's just what works.
So if you're the guy listening to this right now who feels totally invisible on the apps, what's the takeaway? The immoral lens would suggest that complaining about it is pointless.
Complaining is a signal of weakness. It screams low status to the very system you're trying to appeal to. The evolutionary perspective is harsh, but it's also empowering. You have to stop negotiating with the algorithm. You cannot win a game that is mathematically rigged against you.
So you have to exit the game.
You have to shift from a provider mindset, which is about seeking validation, asking to be picked, to what you might call a conqueror mindset. And I don't mean that in some violent or aggressive way. I mean it in the Marcus way. You build internal value first. You find your residency. You build real-world competence.
You rewire your own brain first.
You trigger the winner effect on your own terms. That's what builds the genuine confidence, the posture, the vibe that actually constitutes a costly signal. You become visible to the female filtering algorithm, not because you got a super like, but because you actually are high status in your own domain.
It really feels like the conclusion is that we can't negotiate with biology. We can write all the social software we want. We can neutralize the roles, rewrite the laws, deconstruct all the narratives. But when the lights go out, like they did for Hendrik in Stockholm, the command line code takes over.
Precisely. The academic thunderclap isn't that equality is bad, it's that equality of opportunity inevitably reveals the inequality of outcome that is inherent in our biology. Real sovereignty begins not by denying these ancient forces, but by understanding the code well enough to run it rather than letting it run you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.